My beloved child, there comes a time in every believer's life when the call of God comes clearly, and the heart is moved to respond immediately. The story in Matthew 4:18-22 is one such moment. A divine calling that demanded an immediate response. As Jesus walked along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon Peter and Andrew, fishermen who were casting their nets into the sea. He called to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Without hesitation, they left their nets and followed him. Not far from there, he found James and John, and the same call was extended to them. They, too, immediately left their boat and their father to follow Jesus. This is a powerful example of how responding to God's call without delay can lead to a life of purpose, transformation, and blessing. When God calls, He often invites us into something far greater than we can imagine, whether it be a new path of spiritual growth, a shift in our lives, or even financial miracles. As we explore the lessons from this story, we are reminded that God's calling is not to be ignored or delayed, but embraced with faith and trust, knowing that He is leading us into His perfect plan. Before we delve further, I encourage you to take a moment and subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you become part of a community that seeks to learn and grow in faith together. Leave a comment below and share how God has called you in your life, whether it be in your spiritual journey, financial decisions, or any other area where His hand is at work. The immediate response of the disciples serves as a profound lesson for all of us. Just as they left their nets and followed Jesus without hesitation, we, too, must be willing to respond quickly to God's guidance in our lives, particularly in our financial decisions. When God calls us to step out in faith, to trust Him with our finances, or to sow into His kingdom, it is not a time to hesitate. The blessings and miracles that follow such obedience are immeasurable. The power of immediate obedience. When Jesus called His disciples, they didn't ask for time to think about it, nor did they hesitate out of fear of the unknown. Their faith in Jesus and His promise was enough to propel them into immediate action. This is the kind of faith we are called to have, especially when it comes to our finances. When we feel led by God to make a financial decision, whether it's giving, investing, or trusting Him for provision, we must respond with the same immediacy. In the context of prayer for financial miracles, immediate obedience opens the door for God's blessings to flow into our lives. Sometimes, God calls us to give generously when we feel like we have little to spare, or He may direct us to a new opportunity that feels uncertain. But just like Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John, when we step out in faith, leaving behind what we know and trusting God's voice, we make room for His miraculous provision. Delayed obedience often leads to missed opportunities for blessing. When God calls, He already knows the path ahead. He sees what we cannot see, and He understands the needs we have before we even ask. Just as the disciples immediately responded to Jesus' call and were blessed beyond their wildest dreams, We too must be quick to follow God's lead in our financial decisions. By doing so, we align ourselves with His perfect will and open the door for prayer for financial miracles to manifest in our lives. Faith and trust in God's provision. Responding to God's call requires a deep level of trust. Trust that His ways are higher than ours and that His plans are always for our good. The disciples didn't fully understand what their lives would become when they followed Jesus. They simply trusted Him. In the same way, we must trust God with our finances. Whether we are facing a financial challenge, making a significant investment, or feeling led to give, our faith must be strong enough to trust that God is our provider. When we offer our prayer for financial miracles, we must do so with the confidence that God knows exactly what we need and when we need it. Our role is to respond to His guidance, trusting that He will take care of the rest. This kind of trust doesn't come from knowing all the details or having a perfect financial plan. It comes from knowing that God is faithful. Just as the disciples left everything behind to follow Jesus, we must be willing to surrender our financial fears, doubts, and control, trusting that God will provide in ways we cannot yet see. Faith, like the disciples demonstrated, is not passive. It requires action. When God calls us to move, we must move, whether that means stepping out in generosity, taking a leap of faith in a new venture, or simply trusting Him to meet our needs. The miracles that follow such faith are powerful testimonies of God's provision and love for His children. Miracles through obedience. The story of the disciples reminds us that miracles often follow obedience. When they left their nets, they had no idea that they were stepping into a life filled with miracles, both spiritual and practical. They saw the blind healed, the lame walk, and the dead raised to life. But they also experienced God's provision in their daily lives. They never lacked for anything because they followed the one who provides. In the same way, when we respond to God's call with immediate obedience, we position ourselves for miracles. This is especially true in the realm of finances. Whether we are praying for debt to be erased, for new job opportunities, or for unexpected blessings, our obedience to God's leading is key. The act of stepping out in faith, whether through giving, investing, or simply trusting God's timing, releases His power to work in our financial lives. Our prayer for financial miracles is not just about asking for money or material things. It's about aligning our hearts with God's will and trusting that He will take care of every need. When we trust God with our finances, we are demonstrating that we believe in His ability to provide. And just like the disciples, when we respond with faith, we will see miracles unfold in our lives, sometimes in ways we never expected. A life of abundance through faith. Jesus' call to His disciples was not just a call to follow, it was a call to a life of abundance. They left behind their fishing nets, but they gained so much more. In the same way, when we respond to God's call in our financial decisions, we are stepping into a life of abundance. This doesn't necessarily mean material wealth, but it does mean that we will never lack for anything. God promises to provide for His children, and He is faithful to fulfill that promise. Our response to God's call, especially in our finances, is a testament to our faith. When we trust Him with our financial decisions, we are saying that we believe in His goodness and His provision. And when we offer our prayer for financial miracles, we are inviting Him to work in ways that are beyond our understanding. As we walk in obedience, we will experience the blessings that come from living a life fully surrendered to God. Just as the disciples experienced the miracles of Jesus firsthand, we too will see the hand of God move in our lives, guiding us, providing for us, and blessing us in ways we never imagined. Conclusion, my beloved child. Remember the story of Simon Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Their immediate response to Jesus' call changed their lives forever. In the same way, when you respond to God's leading in your financial decisions, you open the door to miracles and blessings that are beyond your imagination. Trust in His provision. Have faith in His timing, and never hesitate to follow where He leads. I invite you once again to share your journey of faith in the comments below. Let us learn from one another and support each other in prayer. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, so we can continue growing together in faith, learning from the Word of God, and witnessing His miracles in every area of our lives. Remember, God is faithful. He hears your prayer for financial miracles, and in His perfect time, He will answer. Stay strong in your faith, and trust that He is working all things for your good. 1. Introduction, my beloved child. Let us journey together to the shores of the Sea of Galilee, where one day, an ordinary group of fishermen encountered the extraordinary call of Jesus. In Matthew 4:18-22, we find Simon Peter and his brother Andrew casting their nets into the water, going about their daily routine as fishermen. Yet, in a single moment, their lives were forever changed when Jesus called to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Without hesitation, they immediately left their nets and followed Him. Soon after, Jesus called James and John, who, like Peter and Andrew, left behind everything to follow the Savior. This story is not just a record of historical events, but a divine lesson about the power of responding to God's call without delay. Peter, Andrew, James, and John could have hesitated. They could have considered the costs, weighed the uncertainties, or asked for more time. But they didn't. Their response was immediate and filled with faith, a faith that trusted in Jesus' plan, even though they couldn't yet see where it would lead. This kind of immediate obedience is essential, not only in spiritual matters but also in how we approach financial decisions. As we reflect on this story, we are invited to ask ourselves, how can we apply this lesson to our own lives? Particularly when it comes to trusting God with our finances. Just as the disciples responded without hesitation to Jesus' call, we too are called to respond swiftly when God leads us in our financial lives. Whether He is calling us to give, to trust Him in times of financial uncertainty, or to step out in faith toward new opportunities. Our immediate response can unlock the door to blessings and financial miracles. When we offer a prayer for financial miracle, we must have the same faith that Peter and his fellow disciples demonstrated. When we offer a prayer for financial miracle, we must have the same faith that Peter and his fellow disciples demonstrated. Their willingness to leave behind their old ways of life and trust Jesus led them into a new life filled with divine purpose and miraculous provision. What would it look like if we responded to God's call with that same level of faith and trust in our financial situations? Before we continue, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss any of the valuable lessons and reflections we will explore from the Word of God. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the story of the disciples. How do you feel called to respond to God's invitation in your life, whether it be spiritually, financially, or otherwise? This story teaches us that when we respond quickly to God's call, we open the door for Him to work in powerful ways in our lives. In the same way, when we respond swiftly to His guidance in our financial decisions, we align ourselves with His will and make room for His miraculous provision. Just as the disciples left their nets to follow Jesus, we are called to leave behind our worries, fears, and reliance on material security, trusting that God is more than capable of meeting every need. In this reflection, we will explore how this lesson of immediate obedience can be applied to your financial life and how your prayer for financial miracle can lead to the abundant blessings God has in store for you. Trust that He is calling you to a life of provision and abundance, just as He called His first disciples to a life of spiritual fulfillment. 2. Story analysis. The immediate response of the disciples, a lesson in faith. My beloved child, let us reflect deeply on the momentous event recorded in Matthew 4:18-22. Jesus, the Son of God, was walking by the Sea of Galilee when he encountered Simon Peter and Andrew, two brothers engaged in the work of fishing. Their hands were busy with nets, their minds focused on the task of providing for their families. Fishing was their livelihood, their stability. But in a single, divine moment, Jesus called out to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." Without hesitation, without question, they left their nets and followed Him. In the same way, Jesus soon called James and John, who were mending their nets with their father. Their response, too, was immediate. They left the boat, left their father, and followed Jesus. The decision these men made was not one of convenience, nor was it made after careful calculation. It was a response rooted in faith and trust, a decision to leave behind everything familiar and secure to follow the voice of God. This moment of immediate obedience reveals a profound truth about faith. When God calls, He often asks us to leave behind the comfort of what we know. For Peter, Andrew, James, and John, their nets and boats represented their livelihood, their identity, and their security. Yet, when Jesus called, they chose to let go of those things and step into the unknown. trusting that what he had in store for them was far greater than anything they could leave behind. The decision to follow Jesus was not just about physical movement, it was about the movement of their hearts toward a deeper trust in God's plan. They didn't ask where Jesus was leading them. They didn't ask how they would provide for themselves. They simply responded in faith, knowing that their future was in his hands. The power of letting go. One of the most significant aspects of this story is the disciples' willingness to let go of everything they had known up until that point. They didn't cling to their nets or boats, symbols of their hard work and stability. Instead, they released them, trusting that following Jesus would lead them to something far greater. This act of letting go is a crucial lesson for us today. We often hold tightly to the things we believe provide us with security, whether it be our jobs, our possessions, or our finances. Yet, when Jesus calls us, he sometimes asks us to release our grip on those things in order to receive the greater blessings he has prepared for us. It is in the act of letting go that we make room for the miracles of God to enter our lives. In the context of our financial lives, this story invites us to ask, what are we holding on to that may be preventing us from experiencing the fullness of God's provision? Are there moments when God is calling us to trust him more deeply with our finances, but we hesitate, clinging to our own plans and resources? The disciples' decision to leave their nets behind teaches us that sometimes, in order to receive a prayer for financial miracle, we must first let go of our need for control and trust in God's greater plan. Faith and decisiveness in responding to God. The immediate response of the disciples highlights the importance of decisiveness in our faith. They did not delay or waver in their decision to follow Jesus. There was no second guessing, no hesitation. This kind of decisive faith is essential when it comes to following God's call in our financial lives as well. Often, when we feel God leading us toward a financial decision, whether it be giving generously, stepping into a new business venture, or trusting him in a time of scarcity, we are tempted to delay. We want to calculate the risks, ensure that we have all the answers, and secure our safety nets before we make a move. But the story of the disciples teaches us that when God calls, our response should be immediate, just as their response was. This doesn't mean acting recklessly, but it does mean trusting that when God leads, he also provides. The disciples left behind their jobs, their families, and their stability. But in exchange, they received a life of purpose and abundance. Their willingness to act decisively in faith opened the door for them to witness the miracles of Jesus firsthand, both in their lives and in the lives of others. In the same way, when we respond to God's leading in our finances, we create space for him to work miracles. Our prayer for financial miracle must be accompanied by a willingness to act when God calls, knowing that his plans are always for our good. Applying this lesson to our financial lives just as Peter, Andrew, James, and John responded immediately to Jesus' call. We, too, must learn to respond swiftly when God speaks into our financial situations. There are times when he calls us to trust him with a bold act of faith, perhaps giving when it feels uncomfortable, or stepping into an opportunity that feels uncertain. In these moments, the lesson of the disciples becomes clear: don't delay. Trust that God's call always leads to something greater. When we respond immediately to God's leading in our finances, we align ourselves with His will. And this alignment opens the door for financial miracles. It's not about acting impulsively, but about trusting that God's timing is perfect and His provision is sure. The disciples didn't know where following Jesus would lead them, but they knew that being with Him was far more valuable than anything they could hold on to in their old lives. In the same way, when we respond to God's call with decisiveness and faith, we position ourselves to receive His blessings. Our prayer for financial miracle becomes more than just words, it becomes a living act of trust, demonstrated through our willingness to follow wherever God leads. The transformation that follows faith the disciples' lives were forever changed because they responded immediately to Jesus' call. They left behind their old identities as fishermen and stepped into a new identity as followers of Christ. Their decision to follow Jesus not only transformed their own lives but also allowed them to be instruments of God's power in the world. In our financial lives, the same principle applies. When we respond to God's call with faith and immediacy, we invite transformation not just in our circumstances, but in our hearts. We begin to see our finances not as something to control or fear, but as a tool that God can use for His glory. The disciples left behind their nets, but they gained a far greater purpose. In the same way, when we release our financial fears and trust God's leading, we gain something far more valuable: a life of abundance, peace, and purpose. My beloved child, let this story be a reminder that God's call always leads to greater things. Just as the disciples didn't hesitate to follow Jesus, you too can respond with faith and trust in your financial decisions. When you pray for a prayer for financial miracle, do so with the confidence that God is leading you toward a life of blessing and provision. Trust that just as He called the disciples from their boats, He is calling you to leave behind your fears, your doubts, and your reliance on earthly security. Follow Him, and you will witness the miracles He has prepared for you. 3. A lesson on trusting and responding to God's call, my beloved child. The story of the disciples' immediate response to Jesus' call is a powerful reminder of what it means to fully trust in God. When Jesus called Peter, Andrew, James, and John to follow Him, they left behind everything without asking questions, without seeking guarantees, and without hesitation. Their willingness to walk away from their livelihoods, their families, and their sense of security reflects a faith that was anchored in complete trust. This is the same kind of trust we are called to have in our financial lives, especially when we seek God's provision and offer our prayer for financial miracles. The disciples did not demand assurances from Jesus. They did not ask where He was leading them or how they would be provided for in the days to come. Instead, they placed their faith in Him, knowing that wherever He led them, it would be for their good. This is the essence of true faith, trusting in God's goodness even when we don't know the details of His plan. The disciples' trust in Jesus wasn't based on what they could see or understand. but on their belief that he was the Son of God, the one who could provide for every need. Letting go of financial worries in our modern lives. It can be difficult to let go of financial concerns. We are often consumed by thoughts of how we will make ends meet, how we will provide for our families, and how we will secure our future. Yet, just as the disciples let go of their nets, we, too, are called to let go of our financial worries and place them in God's hands. When we offer a prayer for financial miracles, we are not merely asking for material blessings. We are surrendering our need for control and trusting that God, who knows our every need, will provide. The disciples' act of leaving behind their nets was symbolic of their willingness to trust Jesus with everything, both their present and their future. In the same way, when we release our grip on financial anxieties, we allow God to work in ways that are beyond our comprehension. This doesn't mean we abandon responsibility or ignore our obligations, but rather that we place our ultimate trust in God's provision. The act of surrender is an act of faith, and it is through this faith that God performs miracles. When we let go of the fear and worry that often accompany financial struggles, we open ourselves up to receiving the blessings God has prepared for us. Our prayer for financial miracles is not just about receiving, but about trusting in the one who provides. The power of trust in financial miracles. Trusting in God, as the disciples did, creates an environment where miracles can occur. When we trust Him fully, we remove the barriers of doubt and fear that often block the flow of His blessings. Just as the disciples' decision to follow Jesus led them into a life of abundance and purpose, our decision to trust God with our finances leads to the same. The disciples' lives were transformed because they were willing to follow Jesus without knowing what the future held. They trusted that He would provide for them, and He did, far beyond what they could have imagined. In the same way, when we trust God with our financial concerns, He can work miracles that go beyond what we expect. The key is to respond to His call with the same faith and readiness that the disciples showed. When we offer a prayer for financial miracles, we must do so with the understanding that God is not just a provider of material needs, but the source of all abundance, spiritual, emotional, and physical. Trusting Him means believing that His provision will come, even when we don't yet see it. Just as the disciples didn't ask for guarantees before following Jesus, we must be willing to trust that God's plans for us are good, even when we don't have all the answers. Responding to God's call in our financial lives. The lesson of the disciples' immediate response to Jesus is not just about their willingness to leave behind their jobs, but about their willingness to place their full trust in Him. In our financial lives, we are often faced with decisions that require us to step out in faith. Whether it's giving generously, trusting God during times of scarcity, or taking a leap into a new opportunity, we are called to respond to God's leading without hesitation. God may be calling you to let go of certain financial fears, to trust Him with a difficult financial situation, or to take a step of faith in a new direction. Whatever it may be, the story of the disciples teaches us that when we respond to God's call with faith and trust, He is faithful to provide. just as the disciples' lives were transformed by their decision to follow Jesus. Our financial situations can be transformed when we place them in His hands. Trusting God with our finances doesn't mean that challenges will disappear overnight. But it does mean that we are no longer carrying the burden alone. When we trust in God's provision, we are walking in the same faith that the disciples had when they left their nets and followed Jesus. And just as their faith was rewarded with miracles, so too can our faith lead to financial breakthroughs. Creating space for financial miracles, the act of trusting God and responding to His call creates space for financial miracles to occur. When we let go of our worries and trust that God is working on our behalf, we make room for His blessings to flow into our lives. The disciples' decision to leave behind their old lives opened the door to a new life filled with purpose and abundance. In the same way, our decision to trust God with our financial decisions opens the door for Him to work in miraculous ways. Our prayer for financial miracles must be rooted in a deep trust that God will provide, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. This trust is not passive, it requires action on our part. Just as the disciples acted by leaving their nets and following Jesus, we must act by responding to God's call in our financial lives. Whether it's through giving, trusting in His timing, or stepping into a new opportunity, our response of faith is the key to unlocking the blessings He has prepared for us. My beloved child, let the story of the disciples be a guiding light in your financial journey. Their willingness to trust and respond to Jesus without hesitation is a powerful example of what it means to live a life of faith. When you pray for a prayer for financial miracles, remember that trust is at the heart of every miracle. Trust that God sees your needs, that He is working on your behalf, and that His provision will come in ways you cannot yet imagine. As you place your financial concerns in God's hands, know that He is faithful, just as the disciples' lives were transformed by their trust in Jesus. Your financial life can be transformed by your trust in God's provision. He is the one who provides, and He will not fail you. Keep your heart open. Respond to His call with faith, and watch as the miracles unfold in your life. 4. Trust in financial decisions, surrendering financial decisions to God's call. My beloved child, let us now reflect on the profound power of surrender. Surrender not only of our hearts and lives but of the very decisions that shape our financial future. Just as the disciples immediately followed Jesus when He called, leaving behind their nets and boats, we, too, are called to place our financial decisions into the hands of our loving Father. Through this surrender, we allow God to guide us, to bless us, and to work miracles in our lives, particularly when we offer a prayer for financial miracle. In our daily financial decisions, whether they are choices about spending, saving, investing, or giving, we are invited to trust in God's provision. The lesson we learn from the disciples is not merely one of obedience but one of complete trust. They did not question Jesus' ability to provide for them once they left their work behind. They simply trusted that following Him was the right path, even if they couldn't see the way forward. Applying surrender to daily financial decisions. In our lives today, we are often faced with complex financial decisions. Should we invest in a new venture? Should we save for the future? Or give generously to those in need? Should we take risks with our resources? Or play it safe? These are questions we ask ourselves often. But the answer lies not in human wisdom alone, but in our willingness to surrender these decisions to God. When we surrender our financial decisions to God's guidance, we are acknowledging that He sees what we cannot. His perspective is eternal, while ours is often limited by present circumstances. Just as the disciples left behind their nets without knowing where Jesus was leading them, we, too, must be willing to let go of the need to control every detail of our financial future. Instead, we place our trust in God, knowing that His plans for us are good. When we offer a prayer for financial miracle, it is more than a request for material blessing. It is an act of surrender, a declaration that we trust God to lead us in every decision we make. Whether it is a decision about how much to give, how to invest, or how to manage our resources, we trust that God will guide us in a way that leads to both spiritual and financial abundance. Trusting in God's timing and provision. One of the greatest challenges in surrendering our financial decisions to God is trusting in His timing. We live in a world that often values instant results, quick returns on investments, immediate financial success, and instant gratification through spending. But God's timing is not like the world's. His provision often comes in ways and times that we do not expect. But it is always perfect. When the disciples left their boats and followed Jesus, they didn't know what their future held. They had no guarantee of material success or financial security. But their trust in Jesus' provision led them to experience miracles beyond their imagination. In the same way, when we surrender our financial decisions to God, we may not always see immediate results, but we can trust that His provision will come at the perfect time. This surrender requires patience and faith. It means letting go of the desire to control outcomes and trusting that God knows what is best for us. Just as the disciples trusted Jesus to lead them on the path to true abundance, we must trust God to lead us on the path of financial provision. When we trust in God's timing, we free ourselves from the anxiety and pressure of trying to force financial success on our own terms. Instead, we can rest in the knowledge that God is working behind the scenes to bring about blessings that are far greater than we could plan for ourselves. Responding to God's guidance in financial decisions. When we feel God leading us in a particular financial direction, whether it is to invest in something new, to give generously, or to make a financial decision that seems risky, we are called to respond with the same readiness that the disciples showed. Their immediate response to Jesus' call is a model for how we should respond to God's leading in our financial lives. God may call us to take steps of faith that seem uncertain, but it is in those moments of uncertainty that we often experience His greatest miracles. When we trust Him with our finances, we create space for His provision to manifest in ways that are beyond what we can imagine. Our prayer for financial miracle becomes a living expression of our faith, demonstrated through our willingness to follow where He leads, even when the path ahead is unclear. Responding quickly to God's guidance in our financial decisions can lead to incredible blessings. Just as the disciples' decision to follow Jesus led them into a life of purpose and abundance, Our decision to follow God's guidance in our finances can lead to financial peace and provision. This doesn't mean that the road will always be easy, but it does mean that we will be walking in alignment with God's will, and there is no safer place to be. The benefits of surrender and trust. When we surrender our financial decisions to God, we experience the peace that comes from knowing we are no longer carrying the burden alone. The weight of financial worry, the pressure to make the right decision, and the fear of failure are all lifted when we place our trust in God. We begin to see our financial lives not as something we must control, but as an opportunity to partner with God in His plan for our lives. Surrendering to God in our financial decisions also opens the door to experiencing His provision in ways we might not expect. When we hold tightly to our resources, afraid to let go, we limit the ways in which God can bless us. But when we open our hands and surrender our financial future to Him, we invite His miracles into our lives. This is the essence of a prayer for financial miracle, not just asking for more, but trusting that God will provide in ways that are far beyond what we could ask or imagine. Finally, when we surrender our financial worries to God, we allow ourselves to live in freedom, no longer bound by the fear of lack or the pressure of material success. We can live with the assurance that God will meet all of our needs. This freedom allows us to be generous with what we have, to invest in God's kingdom, and to trust that He will multiply what we have given. My beloved child, the story of the disciples' immediate response to Jesus' call teaches us the power of surrender. When we surrender our financial decisions to God, trusting Him to lead us, we position ourselves to receive His miraculous provision. Whether it is a decision about how to invest, how to spend, or how to give, we are called to place those decisions in the hands of our loving Father. When you offer your prayer for financial miracle, do so with the confidence that God is already at work on your behalf. Surrender your worries, your doubts, and your fears, knowing that He is the one who provides. Just as the disciples left behind their nets and followed Jesus, you, too, can leave behind your financial concerns and trust that God will lead you into a life of abundance. May you always remember that God's provision is perfect, and His timing is flawless. Trust in Him with all your heart, and He will direct your path, providing for you in ways you could never have imagined. Stay faithful, surrender, and watch as God's miracles unfold in your life. 5. Real life examples of responding and surrendering in prayer. My beloved child, let me share with you the stories of those who, in moments of financial desperation, responded immediately to God's call and entrusted their worries into His hands. These are not merely tales of hope, but living testimonies of how faith and surrender in a prayer for financial miracle can transform lives. These stories teach us the power of immediate obedience to God's guidance and how His blessings flow when we choose to place our trust entirely in Him. Consider the story of Emily, a single mother struggling to make ends meet. For months, she had been burdened by debt and the anxiety of providing for her children. She had prayed, but the situation seemed hopeless. One Sunday during church, The pastor spoke about trusting God fully, especially in times of financial need. As Emily sat in the pews, she felt a clear tug on her heart to give an amount that seemed impossible for her situation. She resisted at first, fearing what would happen if she gave away what little she had. But in that moment, she remembered the story of the widow's mite and how Jesus blessed her offering. Without further hesitation, Emily responded to the call, trusting that God was leading her. The very next week, Emily received an unexpected financial gift from a family member she hadn't spoken to in years. The amount was far greater than what she had given, and it was more than enough to cover her debts. This wasn't a coincidence, it was God's answer to her prayer for financial miracle. Through her willingness to respond quickly to God's prompting, Emily witnessed a powerful turnaround in her financial life. Her story teaches us that when we respond to God's call with faith, we open the door for His blessings to flow. Emily's immediate obedience to God's leading was not about the amount she gave, but about the trust she placed in Him. When we surrender our financial concerns to God, trusting in His ability to provide, we allow Him to work in ways that surpass our understanding. Transformations through trust and surrender. Another remarkable example is the story of David, a businessman whose company was on the verge of collapse. For years, David had worked tirelessly to build his business, but unexpected market changes left him with financial instability. Faced with bankruptcy, he prayed fervently, asking God for guidance and a financial breakthrough. One day, during his morning devotion, David felt a strong conviction to invest in a struggling small business, an investment that seemed risky and illogical given his current financial situation. But David, remembering the faithfulness of God, chose to trust the nudge he felt. He responded immediately, without second guessing or delay. A few months later, the small business he had invested in unexpectedly flourished, and the returns from his investment not only saved his own company from bankruptcy but also led to unprecedented growth. David knew this was not just a stroke of luck. It was the result of God's provision and the fulfillment of his prayer for financial miracle. David's story underscores the importance of trusting God's leading, even when it doesn't make sense from a human perspective. His decision to respond immediately to the prompting of the Holy Spirit opened the door for financial blessings he could not have anticipated. When we place our trust in God and act on His guidance, we allow Him to transform our financial situations in ways that defy logic or expectation. The power of immediate response. Both Emily and David experienced profound financial transformations, not because of their own efforts, but because they were willing to respond immediately to God's call. Their stories highlight a crucial lesson: God's blessings often come in response to our willingness to surrender, to trust, and to act when He calls. When we hesitate or delay, we may miss out on the miracles He has prepared for us. In each of these stories, the individuals faced significant financial challenges, but their willingness to respond immediately to God's leading, whether it was through giving, investing, or simply trusting Him, resulted in breakthroughs that transformed their lives. This is the power of surrendering our financial concerns to God and trusting that He will provide. Their immediate responses were acts of faith, and their trust in God's provision was rewarded with blessings that far exceeded their expectations. The lesson here is clear: when we feel God calling us to act in faith, we must not delay. Whether He is prompting us to give, invest, or make a financial decision that requires trust, our immediate response can open the door to miracles. Just as the disciples left everything behind to follow Jesus, we too must be willing to leave behind our financial fears and trust that God will meet our needs. Trusting God in financial uncertainty. In the face of financial uncertainty, it is natural to want to hold tightly to what we have. But the stories of Emily and David show us that it is in these moments of uncertainty that God often calls us to act in faith. Their decisions to respond immediately to God's leading were not based on certainty, but on trust. And it was through their trust that God's provision was made manifest. When we offer a prayer for financial miracle, we are not simply asking for financial relief. We are declaring our trust in God's ability to provide. This trust is not passive, it requires action. Emily's gift and David's investment were both acts of faith. And it was through these acts that God worked miracles in their lives. Their stories remind us that God's provision often comes after we have stepped out in faith, after we have responded to His call with immediate obedience. My beloved child, the stories of Emily and David remind us of the power of immediate response to God's call. When we are willing to trust Him fully, even in the face of financial uncertainty, we open the door for His blessings to flow. Their lives were transformed because they chose to act in faith, responding to the guidance of the Holy Spirit without hesitation. As you navigate your own financial journey, I encourage you to listen for God's leading. When He calls, respond with faith, knowing that He is your provider. Whether He is prompting you to give, invest, or make a financial decision that requires trust, your immediate response can be the key to unlocking the blessings He has prepared for you. Remember, your prayer for financial miracle is not just a request, it is an invitation for God to move in your life. Trust in Him, respond when He calls, and watch as He works miracles in your financial situation. 6. Conclusion, my beloved child. As we draw to the close of this journey, let us remember the powerful lessons that have been laid before us. From the immediate response of the disciples to the transformative stories of faith and surrender, one truth remains clear: when we respond quickly to God's call and place our trust entirely in Him, we create space for His divine provision and blessing. Whether through stepping out in faith with a financial decision or offering a heartfelt prayer for financial miracle, God is always ready to meet us where we are and work wonders in our lives. The lesson of prompt obedience is one that carries profound implications for our financial lives. Like the disciples who left everything behind to follow Jesus, we, too, must be willing to surrender our worries, fears, and uncertainties about the future. It is in that surrender that God's provision flows. When we let go of the need to control, we allow God to take the reins and lead us into a life of abundance, not only spiritually but financially as well. The greatest blessings often come when we choose to respond immediately to His guidance. Trust in God, my child, is the foundation upon which all miracles are built. As you continue to offer your prayer for financial miracle, remember that trust is not passive. It requires action. It requires a heart ready to follow God's direction without delay, without hesitation, and without fear. Just as God was faithful to provide for the disciples, He will be faithful to provide for you in your financial journey. I encourage you, now more than ever, to persist in prayer. Never underestimate the power of consistent, faith-filled prayer. Keep asking, keep seeking, and keep knocking. For God promises that He hears every prayer. As you seek His guidance in your financial decisions, respond quickly when He calls. Whether it's a decision to give, to invest, or to trust Him in a time of scarcity, know that your quick response opens the door to blessings beyond your imagination. Before you go, I invite you to share your journey of faith with us. Leave a comment below, sharing how God has worked in your life and how you are responding to His call. Let us learn from one another and grow together in faith. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel so that we can continue this walk of faith together, learning from the Word of God and witnessing His miracles unfold in every area of our lives. Remember, my beloved child, God is faithful. He sees your needs, hears your prayers, and is ready to act on your behalf. Trust in Him, respond when He calls, and watch as the financial miracles you've prayed for begin to manifest in ways you never expected. Keep the faith, remain steadfast, and know that with God, all things are possible. And now, my beloved child, as we part from this reflection, let this be a moment where you decide to step into the fullness of God's promises. The key to unlocking the miracles you seek, including the prayer for financial miracle, lies in your response, your willingness to act in faith and surrender your concerns fully to Him. God is calling you today, just as He called the disciples by the Sea of Galilee. Will you leave behind the fears and doubts? Will you trust Him with your finances, knowing that His plans are always for your good? Take that step of faith, respond to His call, and watch as He opens the floodgates of heaven, pouring out blessings beyond what you can imagine. Now is the time. Don't hesitate. Trust in God's unfailing love. Act with courage, and be ready to receive the miracles that are already on their way. Amen.